My name is Anna, and I am 30 years old. For as long as I can remember, my father's shadow loomed over everything, shaping my childhood with the bleakness of an endless winter. In his eyes, I was never quite enough. My brothers were the luminaries of his personal constellation, radiating a brilliance that was withheld from me. I was the dust in the corners, the dissonant note in a melody he was trying to orchestrate in his own way. Every endeavor, every achievement, was either minimized or unfavorably compared, turning the pursuit of his approval into a race with no finish line. I grew up with the persistent feeling of being an interloper in my own family, a piece that didn't fit into the puzzle he had assembled. This feeling of invisibility reached its zenith on what should have been a day of unadulterated joy for my sister. It was her wedding, a grandiose affair, and I was there, yet simultaneously, I wasn't. My name, conspicuously absent from the invitation. My place, conspicuously vacant at the head table. It was a public and chilling declaration that I was non-existent. To them, a silenced truth that transformed me into a memory that had never existed for the assembled family. The air in the hall hung heavy with omissions, seeming to vibrate with the charade everyone was desperately trying to maintain. Each laugh, each embrace exchanged between the guests, felt like a dagger plunged into my chest, echoing years of devaluation and disdain. I felt like a phantom, observing life unfold without me, without anyone even registering my absence, which was, paradoxically, my very presence there. That frigid scene of celebration was the embodiment of everything I had felt throughout my entire life: the exclusion, the pain of being forgotten, the tacit acceptance that I didn't matter. My mind drifted through childhood memories, of frustrated attempts to capture my father's attention, of petty acts of rebellion that only resulted in more disdain. That day wasn't just my sister's wedding, it was the culmination of a journey of pain and erasure, a public testament to my non-existence. I was on the precipice of accepting this fate, of resigning myself to forever being the invisible daughter, the forgotten sister. It was then, amidst that glacial celebration, that an unexpected voice shattered the pact of silence that seemed to envelop everyone. A toast was raised, and with it, a direct acknowledgement of me. The entire hall froze, not because of my mere presence there, but because of the secret they were all desperately trying to keep buried. This wasn't just a wedding gone awry, it was a fissure in a meticulously constructed facade, poised to collapse, exposing the shadow that loomed over us all. In that instant, I realized that the true battle wasn't for a seat at the table, but for finding my own self-worth, and perhaps, the strength to forgive myself and those who had wounded me. The voice that shattered the silence in that hall didn't belong to a close relative, nor a family intimate privy to the whole story. It was Dona Clara, an elderly woman, a longtime friend of my grandmother, who had always treated me with a fondness I rarely received at home. Her toast, simple and direct, a toast to Anna, whose brilliance has always illuminated us, even when they tried to conceal it, made the entire room freeze. The ensuing silence was deafening, heavy with the tension of an exposed secret. My father, who until then had maintained an impeccable demeanor, paled. My sister, the bride, averted her gaze. In that instant, I felt a strange mixture of shame and a spark of power. The invisibility that consumed me had been broken, not by me, but by someone who dared to see me. That moment proved to be a watershed. I left the marriage shortly thereafter, my mind reeling. The humiliation was still palpable, yet Dona Clara's voice resonated in my mind, not as a lament, but as a clarion call. I realized that living in my father's shadow, seeking an approval that would never materialize, was a self-imposed prison. I decided it was time to emancipate myself. My initial action was to invest in myself, something I had perpetually deferred for fear of causing displeasure. I harbored a clandestine passion for graphic design, a field my father had always scorned, dismissing it as futile artistic endeavors. Ignoring the acerbic remarks, I enrolled in a night course, utilizing my savings to cover the tuition fees. The initial months were grueling. I worked during the day, studied at night, and coped with my family's indifference. My father, noticing my newfound dedication, would attempt to dishearten me with jests about my hobbies and the wasted time. There were moments when discouragement almost led me to abandon the endeavor altogether. I recall one evening when one of my projects was harshly criticized in class, and my father's voice echoed in my head, "I warned you this would lead to nothing." I sat on the sidewalk and wept, feeling the weight of years of disparagement. But instead of surrendering, that frustration transmuted into fuel. I wouldn't do it for him, I would do it for myself. Over time, I began to see the fruits of my labor. My designs improved, I received accolades from my professors, and I even managed to land some freelance work. Small projects at first, but each one was a personal triumph. I realized that the respect I so craved wouldn't come from my father's approval, but from my own ability and dedication. Gradually, I built a network of professional contacts, people who saw me for who I was, for my talent, and not for my position. In the family hierarchy, my self-assurance blossomed, and with it, the courage to assert myself. When my father tried to belittle me, I no longer cowered. I responded with composure and firmness, or simply withdrew from the conversation, refusing to give him the power to unsettle me. I was becoming Anna, the professional, the woman, and not just the invisible daughter. Life moved forward, and my career flourished. But fate, with its peculiar irony, held one final trial in store. My father, an astute and proud businessman, faced a devastating financial crisis. A risky investment crumbled, bringing his company to the brink of bankruptcy. He, who had always appeared unwavering, was now collapsing. Far from feeling satisfaction, I felt an emptiness. It wasn't about revenge, but about the recognition that, despite everything, he was my father. I, with my expertise in design and branding, which he had so scorned, was in a unique position to help him. The decision was agonizing and complex. I could ignore it, leaving him to face the consequences alone. But I realized that would be a hollow victory, an extension of the pain that had haunted me for years. I chose redemption, not just for him, but for myself. I decided to reach out, not out of obligation, but out of the strength I found within myself, a strength capable of forgiving and building bridges, even where previously there had only been chasms. After my sister's wedding, Donna. Clara's voice echoed in my mind, but not hers alone. The coldness of my father reverberated too, his words that had diminished me since childhood. It was there, in the deafening silence of my own home, that the penny finally dropped. I realized how his constant criticism, his disdain for anything I loved or wanted to do, had taken deep root within me. I believed him. I believed that I was clumsy, untalented, destined for a life devoid of luster. My dreams, once so vivid, had become timid whispers, almost shameful. I found myself ensnared in a web of insecurities that weren't inherently mine, yet I had absorbed them as immutable truths. I began to question, was I truly inept at everything? Was the life I envisioned, brimming with color and creativity, merely a childish fantasy? The prospect of a future unburdened by his approval felt daunting, yet strangely liberating. It was as if a bubble was on the verge of bursting, revealing to my very self that my perception of myself, and of my capabilities, had been warped by years of devaluation. One day, while idly perusing an old newspaper I found in the house, my gaze lingered on an advertisement for a night school graphic design course. It was something that had always piqued my interest, having secretly sketched in my notebook since childhood, but which my father had consistently derided as a waste of time. In that moment, however, the advertisement didn't seem frivolous. It seemed like a portal, a small aperture into a world where my ideas might hold worth. The prospect of crafting something of my own, of giving form to my personal visions, ignited an ember I had presumed extinguished, a spark of potential I had never fully permitted myself to explore. Fueled by a newfound courage, and without telling a soul, I used my meager savings to enroll. Each class was a breath of fresh air, a validation that I had potential, that my hands and my mind could create beautiful things. It was my first, tentative step towards independence, a silent escape from the emotional captivity I had been living in. But the joy was short-lived. My father, with his uncanny knack for controlling every aspect of my life, eventually found out. I don't know how, perhaps a bill or a receipt. He confronted me in the dining room, his voice low, but laden with a barely suppressed rage. "What do you think you're doing, Anna? Squandering money on this nonsense? You need to focus on something worthwhile, something with a future, not these little doodles. You have no talent for it, you never have. You'll fritter away what little you have and then you'll regret it." His words sliced like razors, echoing all the times he'd told me I wasn't good enough. That was the boundary he imposed on me, an invisible wall he had built around me. He was trying to drag me back into obscurity, back to the role he had assigned me. But, for the first time, I felt an internal resistance, a voice that said, "Not this time." I wouldn't allow his words to dictate my path again. Despite my father's barely concealed rage and his cutting words, something had shifted within me. The bubble of invisibility he had tried to trap me in was cracked, and the light of the design course streamed through that fissure. I clung to each class like a shipwreck survivor to their life raft. It was exhausting, yes, but every vector, every color, every new tool I mastered was a small victory against the discouragement that gnawed at me at home. I continued to work during the day and rushed to the course in the evening, often arriving home late, my mind buzzing with ideas and my body wearied. It was in one of those evening classes that I met Professor Ricardo. He wasn't like the others. He sported a well-maintained, grizzled beard, wore spectacles perched on the tip of his nose, and possessed a calm yet captivating manner of speaking that held everyone's attention. I, always keeping to myself, would sit in the back rows, attempting to remain unnoticed. But he had a different kind of gaze. One day, we were reviewing a personal branding project, and I had submitted something I considered mediocre, the result of a week of relentless criticism from my father regarding the frivolity of my chosen path. I was expecting yet another reprimand, perhaps a suggestion to seek something more practical. Instead, Professor Ricardo stopped at my desk and scrutinized my work silently for a long time. My heart pounded. He pointed to a detail, a small icon I had created, almost hidden within the design. "Anna," he said, his voice gentle, yet resolute, "this has soul. It holds a narrative that few designers manage to express. You have an eye for the subtle, for what lies between the lines. Don't let the external noise prevent you from hearing your own voice." No one had ever said anything like that to me. Not about my designs, not about me. His words were a salve for old wounds, a recognition I had never received from my father. He invited me to stay after class so we could discuss my style further. On that day, Professor Ricardo became more than just a teacher, he became a mentor. He saw in me a potential that I, so accustomed to being diminished, could barely perceive myself. He encouraged me to explore my creativity fearlessly, to embrace my unique perspective. He shared books, artists, and projects that inspired me, and made me dream bigger. He taught me that true worth lay not in the approval of others, but in the authenticity and passion I poured into my work. His words and support were the flame that rekindled hope within me, revealing that there was a world out there where my talent and my voice could flourish, irrespective of the shadows looming over my home life. I began to believe that I could, indeed, build something significant, something of my own, with my own hands and my own vision, despite the hardships and the constant devaluation I faced at home. My initial foray into a design course project, a campaign for a modest bookstore, proved to be a crucible. My father's voice reverberated, "You've no aptitude for this." This declaration became a mantra, and each stroke I executed seemed discordant. I endured sleepless nights, endeavoring to disregard the doubt he had instilled. The presentation wasn't a debacle, but it fell short of my aspirations. The professor's critiques resonated as confirmation of my father's assessment. I returned home crestfallen, burdened by the weight of years of belittlement. I nearly capitulated, gazing at the computer screen with a profound urge to obliterate everything. His voice, the voice of doubt, seemed to be prevailing, but then, something ignited within me. It wasn't anger, but a quiet obstinacy. I had allowed him to define me for far too long. I recalled Professor Ricardo's words, "You possess an eye for the subtle. Don't let external noise prevent you from hearing your own voice." In that moment, I resolved that, even if I failed, I would fail trying, and not by succumbing to someone else's limiting expectations. I began to view that project not as a full stop, but as a rough draft. I reworked it, applying the professor's critiques and, more importantly, heeding my own intuition. Each mistake became a lesson, each hardship an opportunity to learn. I learned to research, to experiment, to not be afraid of starting over. The challenges persisted. There was a group project where my ideas were disregarded by my colleagues. My father, upon hearing this, made a point of emphasizing, "I told you that no one would take your artistic ideas seriously." The comment stung, reigniting old insecurities. I felt invisible once more, just like at my sister's wedding. But this time, the feeling lasted less. Instead of isolating myself, I sought out the professor and asked for feedback on how to better position myself in team environments. He taught me about assertive communication, about how to present my ideas more strategically, without losing my creative essence. Every no, every critique, every moment of doubt, didn't break me. On the contrary, it shaped me. I discovered a resilience I didn't know I possessed. I learned that failing doesn't equate to being a failure, but rather a step in the learning process. I realized that true strength wasn't in avoiding mistakes, but in how I recovered from them. I began to see my father not as an omnipotent figure capable of defining my destiny, but as someone with his own limitations and fears. And in that process, his voice, which had once been a thunderclap, gradually became a distant echo, while my own voice, my intuition, and my passion began to resonate louder and clearer. I was constructing my own definition of success, brick by brick, forged from my own perseverance. Despite Professor Ricardo's advancements and support, my father's shadow still loomed large. Try as I might to shield myself, his words invariably found their mark. I recall one evening in particular. I had just received positive feedback on a complex project, a small acknowledgement that, to me, meant the world. I arrived home and, filled with a rare euphoria, attempted to share the news with him. "Dad, the professor praised my work immensely today. He said I have a unique eye for detail." He was reading the newspaper and barely glanced up. "Oh, really? And will that pay your bills? Drawing is for children, Anna. Grow up. Stop wasting your time with these trifles and find something worthwhile to do with your life." The sentence, uttered with his usual indifference, was like a bucket of cold water, but this time, something different transpired. Instead of shrinking, instead of feeling the familiar sting of self-deprecation, an odd stillness settled within me. It was as if his voice, which for years had been a deafening thunder, had become an insignificant whisper. I rose from the table, not with anger, but with an icy clarity. I went to my room, and there, looking at my design projects scattered across the table, I realized that the truth was not in his words, but in the passion I felt for every line, every color. It was there, in that silent instant, that I made the most drastic decision of my life. I would no longer allow his definition of worth to be my own. I would no longer be the invisible daughter, the erased sister. I would be Anna, the professional. The woman I was becoming. From that day forward, every action I took was a step toward my liberation. I began to scrimp and save every penny, working longer hours and slashing expenses. I researched apartments and meticulously planned my move. In secret. Each box I mentally packed was a brick in the construction of my new life. There was fear, yes, a dizzying fear of the unknown, of being alone for the first time, but it was overshadowed by an overwhelming sense of agency. For the first time, I was the architect of my own destiny, and not merely a character in the play my father insisted on directing. The prospect of having a space of my own, where my creations could flourish without judgment, was a powerful impetus. When I finally found a small apartment and signed the lease, the feeling was indescribable. It wasn't just a new address, it was a fresh start. On moving day, I didn't make a grand announcement. I simply informed my father that I was leaving. His reaction was one of shock and a contained fury, the same one I knew so well, but which now held no power over me. He tried to dissuade me with arguments about irresponsibility and ingratitude, but I merely listened, without reacting. My response was my action. As I closed the door of that apartment for the last time, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. A burden of years of unmet expectations and a relentless pursuit of approval. That was my new point of departure. From then on, the only validation that would matter was my own, and the only voice I would heed was the one that propelled me to pursue my own fulfillment. My career in design took off in a way I never imagined. Precisely because I was free to be myself, to create unencumbered, without anyone's shadow looming over me. After moving and watching my career flourish, life gained a new rhythm. The days were filled with challenging projects and the satisfaction of building something of my own. But beneath the newly acquired independence, an old wound remained: my relationship with my father. I no longer sought his approval, but I felt I needed a different kind of closure, an honest conversation we had never had. It wasn't about retribution, but about truth. The opportunity presented itself during a Sunday lunch, a rare occasion when the family gathered at his house. Gradually, the others departed, leaving just the two of us in the room, a weighty silence filling the space. I took a deep breath. "Dad," I began, my voice calm but firm, "we need to talk about some things. Things that have deeply wounded me over the years." He looked at me, surprised, and I saw a flicker of discomfort in his eyes. "Wounded? What are you talking about, Anna?" His tone was immediately defensive, the same stance he always adopted. "I'm talking about how I felt invisible to you," I continued, holding his gaze. "At my sister's wedding, for instance, my name wasn't even on the invitation. My place was empty at the table. That was a public declaration that I didn't exist for the assembled family. You deliberately erased me, Dad. It wasn't an accident." The mention of the wedding struck a nerve. His lips tightened, and he averted his gaze to the window. "I only wanted what was best for you, Anna. I wanted you to be strong, to follow a secure path. I didn't want you to get lost in little drawings." He attempted to downplay it, as always. "But your good intentions made me feel inadequate, Father," I retorted, my voice rising slightly, though still controlled. "Every time you dismissed my interest in design, every time you compared me to my brothers, you were telling me I wasn't good enough. That my dreams were foolishness. I needed your belief, not your constant criticism. It turned me into a phantom, a memory that never existed for the family." The silenced truth, coldly and publicly enforced, corroded me from within. He remained silent for a long moment, the air heavy with all the omissions. For the first time, I didn't see just anger or disdain on his face, but a flicker of something that looked like embarrassment, perhaps even remorse. He gazed at me, his eyes scanning my face, as if he were truly seeing me for the first time. I didn't realize you felt that way," he finally mumbled, his voice lower than usual. It wasn't an apology, but it was an acknowledgement, a small, almost imperceptible, step forward. The tension in the room was palpable, but a fissure had formed in the carefully constructed facade between us. It wasn't the perfect understanding I might have dreamt of, but it was a start. A pathway, however imperfect and fraught with challenges. had been opened toward a new dynamic, where my voice, at long last, was being heard. After relocating and witnessing my career flourish, life took on a new rhythm. My days were replete with challenging projects and the gratification of building something of my own. However, lurking beneath this newfound independence, a wound remained unhealed: my relationship with my father. While I no longer sought his approval, I felt the need for a different kind of closure, an honest conversation that had perpetually eluded us. This wasn't about retribution, but rather about veracity. The opportunity presented itself during a Sunday lunch, a rare occasion, when the family gathered at his house. Gradually, the others departed, and only the two of us remained in the room, a heavy silence permeating the space. I took a deep breath. "Dad," I began, my voice calm yet resolute, "we need to talk about some things. Things that have deeply hurt me over the years." He looked at me, surprised, and I saw a flicker of unease in his eyes. "Hurt? What are you talking about, Anna?" His tone was immediately defensive, the same posture he always assumed. "I'm talking about how I felt invisible to you," I pressed on, holding his gaze. "At my sister's wedding, for instance, my name wasn't even on the invitation. My place, conspicuously empty at the table. It was a public declaration that I didn't exist to the assembled family. You deliberately erased me, Dad. It wasn't an oversight." The mention of the wedding clearly stung him. His lips tightened, and he shifted his gaze to the window. "I only wanted what was best for you, Anna. I wanted you to be strong, to follow a secure path. I didn't want you to get lost in doodles." He attempted to downplay it, as always. "But your good intentions made me feel inadequate, Father," I retorted, my voice rising slightly, but still controlled. "Every time you disparaged my interest in design, every time you compared me to my siblings, you were telling me I wasn't good enough, that my dreams were frivolous. I needed your belief, not your relentless criticism. It turned me into a phantom memory for this family." The silenced, cold, and publicly enforced truth eroded me from the inside out. He remained silent for a long moment, the air thick with all that had been left unsaid. For the first time, I saw not just anger or disdain on his face, but a flicker of something that resembled embarrassment, perhaps even remorse. He looked at me, his eyes scanning my face as if he were truly seeing me for the first time. I didn't realize you felt that way," he finally mumbled, his voice lower than usual. It wasn't an apology, but it was an acknowledgement, a small, almost imperceptible, step forward. The tension in the room was palpable, but a fissure had formed in the carefully constructed facade between us. It wasn't the perfect understanding I might have dreamed of, but it was a start. A path, however imperfect and fraught with challenges, had been forged toward a new dynamic, where my voice, at long last, was being heard. The opportunity to prove all of this to myself, and not to him, arrived unexpectedly. I was selected to present a brand design project to a major multinational corporation, a dream client. It was the chance of a lifetime, but also the greatest professional challenge I had ever faced. In the days leading up to the presentation, my father's voice resurfaced, stronger than ever, echoing in my mind, "You have no talent for this, you're going to waste your time, this will lead to nothing." Every time I sat down to review the slides, doubt seeped in, corroding my confidence. There was one night when I almost gave up, the weight of years of belittlement crashing down on me like an avalanche. I felt the fear of failure, not just professionally, but of failing to prove to myself that I was capable. On the day of the presentation, my heart hammered in my chest. The auditorium was packed, and the executives wore stern expressions. I began to speak, and for a fleeting moment, my voice faltered. I felt panic start to set in. It was then that, instead of shrinking back, I visualized myself at my sister's wedding, invisible, insignificant. But this time, the image didn't defeat me, it propelled me forward. I recalled Dona Clara's words, Professor Ricardo's support, and, more importantly, all the nights I'd spent working, every mistake that had taught me something, every small victory that had brought me to this point. I realized I wasn't there to prove anything to my father. I was there for myself. His voice was still there. A distant whisper, but it no longer held any power. I took a deep breath, straightened my posture, and my voice steadied. I spoke with fervent passion about every detail of my project, about the research, the creativity, the strategy underpinning each choice. There was a moment when one of the executives posed a challenging question, and instead of faltering, I responded with clarity and conviction, defending my ideas with the assurance of someone who knows their craft. I was no longer the insecure Anna, seeking approval. I was the professional Anna, the designer, the woman who had forged her own path. At the end of the presentation, the applause was warm, and I felt a wave of relief and pride wash over me. The contract was mine. But the real victory wasn't the client, it was the unshakable certainty that I had overcome the shadow of my father. finding the strength to be who I had always wanted to be, without the need for his validation. I was free. That contract with the multinational corporation wasn't merely a professional milestone, it was an earthquake that redefined my internal world. When the news was confirmed, there were no euphoric shouts, but rather a profound stillness, a relief that permeated every fiber of my being. It was as if, for the first time, the air I breathed was truly my own. The applause in the meeting room resonated differently from the applause I used to imagine for my father. It wasn't for him, not for his approval, but for me, for the Anna, who had reinvented herself. I had overcome the greatest professional challenge of my life, but the real achievement wasn't in the signed document, but in the unwavering certainty that I had surpassed the shadow that had accompanied me for so long. That night, ensconced in my small apartment, surrounded by my own endeavors and the tranquility I had painstakingly cultivated, I gazed at my reflection. I saw not the invisible daughter, not the eclipsed sister, but a woman. A woman who had battled, stumbled, and risen countless times. Every line of code I mastered, every design I conceived, every no that metamorphosed into a yes through sheer tenacity, all of it stood as a silent testament to my resilience. I realized that the respect and love I had so desperately sought from my father, which I had implored with every endeavor and every attempt to please, were no longer contingent on his approval. They resided within me, they always had. That void at my sister's wedding table, the omission of my name from the invitation, all of it had wounded me deeply, yes, but it had also propelled me to discover my own voice and my own intrinsic worth. The penny truly dropped when I caught myself smiling as I reflected on my journey, not with bitterness, but with pride. I no longer needed him to see me in order to exist. I was real, tangible, and my accomplishments were proof of that. It wasn't about proving him wrong anymore, but about proving to myself that I was right. Right to pursue my dreams, right to trust my intuition, right to believe in my talent, even when no one else did. The validation, the only kind that truly mattered, came from within, from my own satisfaction in creating, in overcoming, in being myself, without apologies or pretenses. The shadow that had loomed over me for years had finally dissipated. It wasn't a dramatic explosion, but a soft, gradual dawn. That marriage, which had once been the apex of my invisibility, became the catalyst for my liberation. I was capable, I was talented, I was worthy of love and respect, not because my father had once said so, but because I knew it. And that truth, born from my own journey and perseverance, was the most powerful of all. I was no longer a memory that had never existed for the gathered family. I was Anna, and I existed fully. That contract with the multinational corporation wasn't just a professional milestone, it was an earthquake that redefined my inner world. When the news was confirmed, there were no euphoric shouts, but a profound stillness, a relief that permeated every fiber of my being. It was as if, for the first time, the air I breathed was truly my own. The applause in the meeting room echoed differently from the applause I had imagined for my father. It wasn't for him, not for his approval, but for me, for the Anna who had reinvented herself. I had overcome the biggest professional challenge of my life, but the real achievement wasn't in the signed document, but in the unwavering certainty that I had overcome the shadow that had haunted me for so long. That night, sitting in my small apartment, surrounded by my own projects and the tranquility I had built myself, I looked at my reflection. I saw not the invisible daughter, not the overshadowed sister, but a woman. A woman who had fought, fallen, and risen countless times. The penny truly dropped when I caught myself smiling as I reflected on my journey, not with bitterness, but with pride. I no longer needed him to see me in order for me to exist. I was real, tangible, and my achievements were proof of that. It wasn't about proving him wrong anymore, but about proving myself right. Right to pursue my dreams, right to trust my intuition, right to believe in my talent, even when no one else did. The validation, the one that truly mattered, came from within, from my own satisfaction in creating, in overcoming, in being myself, without apologies or pretenses. Time passed, and the dynamic with my father subtly shifted. There was no formal apology, nor an effusive embrace, but a silent acceptance began to manifest itself. At a family dinner months later, he inquired about the challenges of my work, something he had never done before. His tone was more one of curiosity than criticism. At another point, he mentioned the news report about the multinational's campaign, with an almost imperceptible nod of his head. I understood. He might never be the emotionally present father I had longed for in childhood, but he saw me. He acknowledged my journey and my accomplishments, even if in his own way, still distant, but present. And, for me, that was enough. I forgave him, not through a heroic act, but through an internal liberation. I forgave him for his limitations, for not knowing how to demonstrate support. More important than forgiving him, I forgave myself. I forgave myself for internalizing his criticisms, for doubting myself for so long, for allowing myself to be defined by another person's limited perspective. The shadow that had loomed over me for years finally dissipated. It wasn't a dramatic explosion, but a gentle, gradual dawn. That marriage, which was once the pinnacle of my invisibility, became the catalyst for my freedom. I was capable, I was talented, I was worthy of love and respect, not because my father would one day say so, but because I knew it. And that truth, born from my own journey and my own perseverance, was the most powerful of all. I was no longer a memory that never existed for the assembled family. I was Anna, and I existed fully, free to build a future where my voice would always be the loudest.